I gave my life to raise him and now he lets her treat me like a servant. She told someone on the phone, she's basically free childcare. It's better than paying a nanny. Then she laughed like it was the cleverest thing she'd ever said. She didn't know I was standing outside the laundry room. Or that I had heard every word. Including the part where she called me a burden. Including the part where she said, if she wants to stay, she better earn her keep. I was holding my own teacup, shaking, spilling it slightly on the tile. Not that anyone would notice. They never stepped foot down here unless they needed something ironed or cleaned or fixed. 3 months earlier, my son said I was too old to live alone. I'd fainted once, at the grocery store, and suddenly I couldn't be trusted with a kettle. He said moving in with them would be safer. He promised I'd be part of the family again. It'll be good for everyone, Mum. I wanted to believe that. I missed them. I missed being needed. And I hated the silence in that old house after my husband passed. So I said yes. But I didn't get a room. I got a folding cot in the laundry room next to the boiler. I didn't get family dinners. I cooked them. I didn't get to rest. I was helping with the kids from 7 in the morning until bedtime, while they went out for work meetings and brunches and personal errands. At first, I told myself I was being useful. I loved my grandchildren. They loved me. I could handle a bit of work. It was temporary, I thought. A season. But seasons don't mock you behind your back. It started small. An offhand comment. A sigh when I asked for help with the dishes. Her rolling her eyes when I reminded the kids to say thank you. Then came the whispers, doors half shut, voices lowered just enough to sting. I held it in. 4 weeks. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want my son to feel caught in the middle. I convinced myself it was just stress, just miscommunication. But that day, when I overheard her say I was basically free childcare, I knew it wasn't confusion. It was cruelty. And worse, he let it happen. My son. The boy I raised alone for 8 years while working 2 jobs. The boy I put first in every decision for half my life. He didn't stop her. He didn't defend me. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, teacup trembling in my hand, heart in my throat. Then I quietly walked back into the laundry room, sat on the cot and stared at the wall. That was the moment something changed. I stopped waiting for kindness to return. I stopped hoping for inclusion. Instead, I started paying attention. I started listening more closely. And I started planning. Because if I was going to be treated like the help, then I'd act like someone they'd regret underestimating. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. The children smiled, thanked me with sleepy voices. My daughter-in-law didn't say anything. She just breezed through the kitchen, grabbed a protein bar, and left her plate on the table like I was invisible. My son didn't come down until after she was gone. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, said good morning, then checked his phone while I handed him his coffee. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't notice my red eyes. He didn't notice anything. The moment he left for work, I sat down and stared at the counter. The kitchen was spotless. The house was quiet. And I felt completely erased. I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. Instead, I opened the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a small notepad. One of the kids had used it for drawing, dinosaurs, mostly. I flipped past the scribbles and started writing. Not a letter. Not a goodbye. A list. Every time she insulted me. Every time he ignored it. Every time I was used and discarded like background furniture. I didn't know what I was going to do with the list yet. But I needed proof, not for anyone else. For me. I needed to remind myself that this wasn't in my head. That I wasn't just being sensitive or dramatic like she liked to say when I flinched at her tone. That week, things got worse. She started correcting the way I spoke to the children. She told me not to teach them old-fashioned manners. She said please and thank you were outdated and that I was making them too soft. She started saying things like, I think Grandma's memory is slipping, right in front of me. And my son just lowered his eyes and stayed silent. They left me with the kids on Friday night so they could have a couple's weekend. I gave the children a bath, read them stories, and tucked them in. When I walked back into the kitchen, I noticed the envelope on the counter. It was open. Inside was a form from the bank. My name was on it. So was my house's address. The house I still owned. The one I had been renting out for extra income. I didn't understand all the language, but the word transfer was circled. My heart dropped. They were planning something. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I took a photo of the form with my phone. Then I put it back exactly how I found it. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about how far I had fallen. I thought about the promises they made when I moved in. How she hugged me and said, "We're so lucky to have you here." How my son told me this would be good for all of us. How I believed them. And how now, I was living in a laundry room while they laughed behind my back and tried to take what was mine. That was the night I decided the list wasn't enough. I needed something they couldn't deny. Something they couldn't spin. So the next day, while they were out, I went to the electronics store. And I bought a recorder. I held the tiny voice recorder in my hand like it was something dangerous. It looked like a USB stick, barely the size of my finger. The clerk showed me how to use it. One switch to turn it on, one to play it back. Simple. I kept it hidden inside my apron pocket. The first few days, I wasn't sure if I'd even catch anything. But on Tuesday, I got lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how you see it. I was folding laundry upstairs when I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone. She was in the next room, pacing and half whispering. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught this: she thinks we really needed her here. Honestly, I just needed someone to deal with the kids while I figured things out. And the house? That's going to work itself out once we get the paperwork signed. I stood still, holding a damp towel to my chest. I could hear the recorder humming softly in my pocket, capturing everything. Later that night, I played it back. Hearing her voice say those things, calmly, as if I were some tool she could discard, made my stomach twist. There was no hesitation in her voice. No guilt. Just strategy. I started recording daily. Sometimes it was subtle things, the way she snapped at me when no one else was around, the way she made comments under her breath when I asked about my mail or the status of my house. Other times, it was worse. One morning, I caught her saying to my son, "If she signs that transfer form, we can be done with all this. Get the money, get the kitchen done, maybe even start looking for a new place without her underfoot." He didn't push back. He just said, "She might ask questions. Don't rush it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk into the room and throw the recorder on the table and say, "Explain that to my face." But I didn't. I stayed silent. Because I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused. The children were still kind to me. They didn't understand what was going on. They brought me drawings and sat in my lap and asked me to read the same books over and over again. They were the only part of this house that still felt like love. Every time I looked at their faces, I reminded myself why I was being careful. I didn't want to turn this into a fight. I wanted to end it cleanly, on my terms, without drama. On Sunday night, I pretended to be asleep when they came home from dinner. They didn't check on me. They never did. I lay on the cot, eyes open, listening to the muffled sound of their voices upstairs. I thought about my husband. What he would have said. What he would have done. He used to say, "People will show you who they are. Just give them time." I used to think he was being cynical. Now, I knew he was just being honest. I had lived in this house for 3 months. And now, with everything I had recorded, everything I had heard, I finally saw them clearly. They didn't bring me here because they loved me. They brought me here because they needed someone they thought would stay quiet. They were wrong. I started backing up the recordings every night. I saved them to a hidden folder on my laptop and sent copies to my email, just in case. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared. They had underestimated me from the beginning. They saw an aging woman who had just lost her husband and figured I was weak. They mistook my kindness for dependence, my quiet for ignorance. What they didn't realize was that I had been alone before. I had raised my son without help. I had handled grief, bills, home repairs, and long winters on my own. I didn't crumble then. I wasn't going to now. By the second week of recording, I had enough to make anyone sick. There were conversations about my will. Comments about how we'll make it easier for her to sign it over once she's tired enough. My daughter-in-law even joked that I'd probably forget what I owned soon anyway. My son didn't laugh at that. But he didn't stop her either. That was the part that cut the deepest. I had defended him to friends, to family, even to myself. I told people he was just busy. That he had a lot on his plate. That marriage was complicated. But the truth was, he saw what she was doing and chose to look the other way. The betrayal sat heavier than any insult. Still, I played my role. I kept the house clean. I packed the kids' lunches. I smiled when I had to. I waited. On Thursday, I called a lawyer. Not the family one my husband and I had used. I found someone new, through a friend. Quiet. Private. I explained the situation in short terms. I didn't even mention the recordings at first. But when I did, she stopped me. "You have recordings?" she asked. "Of both of them?" I told her yes. Her tone changed. She got serious. She said she'd need to listen, but if what I had was real, I could protect myself, maybe even turn the tables completely. We set an appointment for the following week. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. That night, I watched them from across the dinner table. My son talked about a new project at work. My daughter-in-law scrolled on her phone while pretending to listen. The kids laughed about something from school. It looked normal from the outside. Ordinary. But I knew what was behind it. I knew what they said when they thought I couldn't hear. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless in that chair. I didn't feel like their guest. I didn't feel like their help. I felt like someone with a plan. They still thought I was naive. They still thought they could handle me with fake concern and guilt trips. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I excused myself early that night, claiming a headache. I went to the laundry room, locked the door, and opened my notebook. The list was growing. The details were sharp. Every date. Every comment. Every lie. I stared at the page, then flipped to a new one. At the top, I wrote 3 words. What comes next? What comes next turned into a checklist. First, gather all the documents. I already had photos of the bank form they tried to hide, the one with my name and house address on it. I found another in my son's home office drawer. A pre-filled power of attorney form, unsigned, but clearly intended for me. They had been planning to take control of everything. My home. My accounts. My decisions. Second, finish the recordings. I didn't need to keep gathering forever, I just needed enough to paint the full picture. And by now, I had hours of audio. I labeled each one by date and subject. Some were subtle, like my daughter-in-law saying I was slipping mentally. Others were more blunt. Conversations about my house, about how they'd get me to sign. Third, prepare to leave. I knew I couldn't stay much longer. Every day I remained in that house, I felt my strength draining. The only thing that kept me from packing my bags on the spot was the thought of leaving unfinished. I wasn't just escaping. I was ending this properly. And I wanted it to sting. The following Monday, I went to my lawyer's office. She listened to 2 full recordings, read through my notes, and examined the paperwork I brought. When she looked up at me, her face was different. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to respect. "We can do something with this," she said. "They've crossed several lines. And if you want to, we can take legal action." I told her I didn't want to sue them. I didn't want to be dragged into courtrooms or make headlines in some neighborhood gossip chain. I just wanted my house protected, my will revised, and a clean exit they couldn't stop. She nodded and said she'd take care of it. Back at the house, things continued as if nothing had changed. I still picked up toys, folded clothes, cooked meals. They still ignored me unless they needed something. But inside, I was gone already. I no longer felt ashamed when she insulted me. I felt detached. Like I was watching a performance I'd already seen too many times. One evening, she tossed a bill on the counter and said, "Can you take care of this?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "No." She blinked, confused. I walked past her without another word. She told my son later that I was getting moody. He shrugged and said, "Maybe she needs a nap." I laughed to myself as I loaded the kids' dishes into the washer. Not because it was funny, but because I knew exactly how wrong they were. I wasn't tired. I was done. A few nights later, I slipped a USB drive into my son's drawer. It was labeled with a sticky note, "For when you're ready to be honest." Inside it were 6 hours of recordings. The next morning, I left before sunrise. My lawyer had finalized the rental agreement on a small apartment downtown. I moved in with just 2 suitcases and my husband's old photo frame. That was all I needed. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave my phone number. I didn't owe them either. The apartment was quiet, but not in a lonely way. It was mine. A single bedroom with warm light in the kitchen, soft carpet underfoot, and a wide window that looked out onto a small park. For the first time in months, I didn't have to wake up to a screaming toddler or the sound of someone slamming cabinet doors upstairs. I made tea and drank it while it was still hot. I didn't check my phone. I knew the messages would come eventually. They did. First from my son. "Where are you?" Then again, an hour later. "Mom, we're worried. Please call." Later that night, the tone shifted. I found the flash drive. "What is this?" I didn't respond. By the next morning, there were 5 more messages. No apologies. No real questions. Just shock. Confusion. A demand to talk. He didn't know how much I had seen. How much I had heard. And now he was sitting with the truth, replaying the moments he thought were private, seeing himself through my ears. I imagined him staring at the screen, hearing his wife call me a burden. Hearing himself go along with it. I hoped it made him sick. I hoped it made him see me differently, even if it was too late. The daughter-in-law didn't message me at all. But 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not handwritten. Typed. Cold. She wrote that she was deeply sorry if I ever misunderstood her intentions, and that there had been stress in the household, but she hoped we could move forward. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't acknowledge anything specific. She signed it with her full name, like it was some HR memo. I folded it in half and threw it away. I didn't need a staged apology. I needed space. And peace. And a life that didn't revolve around being used. That week, I got my affairs in order. I changed my will. I updated the deed to my home, removing my son as a fallback beneficiary. I added a clause protecting any future assets from being claimed by either of them. My lawyer said I could press charges for attempted fraud if I wanted. I didn't. That wasn't my goal. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. And I had it now. Some evenings, I still thought about the children. They had never done anything wrong. They were too young to understand what was happening, too innocent to be part of it. I missed them, deeply. But I reminded myself that loving them didn't mean staying in a toxic place just to be near them. One day, when they're older, maybe they'll ask questions. Maybe they'll come find me. And when they do, I'll have the story ready. I'll show them that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away without yelling. To know when you're being drained. To know when you've given enough. My son thought I needed him to survive. But I had survived far worse without him. I had survived alone, with less, and with more love in an empty house than I ever found in theirs. And now, I was free. A few weeks passed before I heard his voice again. It came through my voicemail. I hadn't picked up the call. I rarely did anymore. He sounded tired, maybe ashamed. He said he hadn't realized how bad things got, and that there's been a lot of reflection lately. He said the kids missed me. That they'd been asking about Grandma. He asked if we could meet, even just for coffee. I listened to it twice. Then I sat quietly at my small kitchen table, staring out the window at a man walking his dog. The world kept moving. I didn't erase the message, but I didn't return the call either. Because the thing is, I knew he missed me. I knew he missed how easy things used to be when I said yes to everything. When I didn't push back. When I took care of what they didn't want to. Now that I had removed myself, the gap was obvious. The comfort was gone. The structure I held up had collapsed without noise, but its absence echoed. He wasn't reaching out because he understood. He was reaching out because he was uncomfortable. It's not the same. That afternoon, I walked to the nearby library. I signed up for a book club. I went home and dug out the old painting supplies I hadn't touched in 10 years. My hands were slower now, but steady. I hadn't felt like this in a long time, not just safe, but visible. Like I was becoming someone again instead of something to be managed. Sometimes I caught myself feeling guilty. I'd think about the grandkids laughing, about the way they hugged me goodnight. I'd wonder if they felt abandoned. But then I'd remember the looks across the dinner table. The hushed voices behind doors. The decisions made without me, about me. I hadn't abandoned anyone. I had saved myself. I started writing again. Just a little each morning. Not a journal, but more like small letters I never planned to send. To my husband. To myself. Sometimes even to the children. One of them said, "I hope you grow up and see through what people pretend to be. I hope you learn to walk away from what hurts, not just survive it." I wrote that for them, but also for me. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the buildings, I pulled out the notebook where I had written the first list. The one where I had documented every slight, every cruel word. I tore it out, slowly. I lit a match and let it burn in the kitchen sink. Not out of spite. Not because I wanted to forget. But because I no longer needed the proof. I had already lived it. And I had already left it behind. My son tried calling again that weekend. 3 times. I didn't pick up. Not yet. He would need to learn something first, that love doesn't survive off convenience. That motherhood doesn't mean servitude. That being family doesn't give you permission to wound someone and expect them to stay. I was done staying. I was building something new now. Quietly. Carefully. And this time, it was just for me. I woke up that Sunday to find a card slipped under my door. It was from the kids. Crayon handwriting, uneven shapes, hearts drawn in the corners. It said, "We miss you, Grandma. Come back soon." Mommy said maybe. Daddy said maybe too. There was a small photograph taped to the inside, a blurry picture of the two of them in the backyard, holding up a sign that just said, "Hi." I held that card to my chest and cried. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I still loved them. That part hadn't changed. I just couldn't be their shield anymore, not while being stepped on by the people meant to protect them too. I called a friend that afternoon, someone I hadn't seen in years. We had lunch at a small cafe downtown, laughed over old memories, made plans to meet again next week. I felt lighter. Not healed, but human again. When I returned home, I opened my laptop and wrote a single message to my son. I got the card. The children are not to blame. I love them and I always will. But I'm not ready to speak with you or her. I hope someday you'll understand why. I didn't wait for a reply. Because this wasn't about him anymore. Or her. Or what they thought of me. It was about reclaiming what was left of my time. I didn't want to spend it trying to fix people who didn't think they were broken. I started volunteering 2 days a week at a literacy center. I made new routines, filled my calendar with quiet commitments, nothing heavy, nothing that drained me. Just things that felt good. Things that made me feel like myself again. Months passed. And then one day, I received a letter. From my son. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter, with shaky handwriting and no return address. He said he had listened to every recording. More than once. He said he hadn't known how bad it sounded until he heard it from the outside. He didn't defend his wife. He didn't defend himself. He just said, "I failed you. I failed the person who gave me everything. I see that now." He didn't ask for anything. Not even forgiveness. I folded the letter and put it in my drawer. I didn't throw it away. Some days, I still hear their voices in my head. The way they spoke when they thought I was too tired or too old to matter. But those echoes are quieter now. What's louder is the sound of my own thoughts, no longer filtered through guilt. What's clearer is my reflection in the morning, looking less like a woman stuck in someone else's house and more like someone who found her way back to herself. I wasn't too old to live alone. I was too loyal to see how little I meant to people I had given everything to. But I see it now. And I will never let myself disappear in someone else's life again.